Hey everyone, I'm Amethescence, and today I will be designing the starters for a Fakemon region that I thought would be fun to create. Let's get started. Since I've always loved cats and dogs, I thought it'd be great if the starter trio were based on popular pets, and so I started drawing a dog for the grass starter. However, when I showed my first draft to a few others, they suggested basing the region on a real-world location, like how the official Pokemon regions are. After some back and forth, I decided to go with Scandinavia, as I was fairly certain that hadn't been done before in the official Pokemon world. So I started researching some Scandinavian dogs that I could base my grass starter on, as well as some plants. And I came across the Shetland sheepdog and the Canadian purple lupin flower, which I thought would be quite the interesting combination. As you can probably tell at this point, I was struggling a lot with this. This was the first time I had ever drawn a Pokemon, and animals aren't exactly my drawing forte. So I ended up redrawing this evolutionary line a couple of times. I just really wanted it to look like a real Pokemon, but couldn't figure it out. From the pose, to the face, to the way I was drawing it in general, it just didn't look like a Pokemon to me. But I eventually figured it out, after a few months. Yeah. I've been working on this for a while, and as you can see, I went through several designs. Based on my research, the lupin flower, although invasive in Iceland, is what's called nitrogen fixing, which means that it converts nitrogen from the atmosphere into a form that other plants and animals can use. It thrives in poor soil, enriching it in the process, promoting forest growth and thriving even in desert environments. It also grows and spreads rather quickly. As for the Shetland sheepdog, my research stated that it's a vocal, loyal family dog that often serves as a herder and a guardian. And with all of this information, I started to have some ideas as to what the roles of this Fakemon line would be. Lupup. A combination of puppy and lupin is the grass starter of the Njorva region. It is a mischievous and playful flower puppy Fakemon that likes to pull pranks on the other grass types, which can sometimes lead to minor conflicts. The roots that wrap around its legs lay dormant, and it can barely move them on its own. This was the first Fakemon I've ever drawn, and I went through many revisions throughout the past few months. But I'm proud to say that the final result is the most Pokemon-looking Fakemon that I've ever drawn. Lupup evolves into Lupinine, a combination of canine and lupin, also a grass type. At this stage, the roots around its legs and tail have started to move on their own, although it still can't control them. The roots will often burrow into the ground and send signals to nearby grass types when Lupinine isn't paying attention. And this ultimately ends in those Pokemon congregating and following Lupinine around. These smaller, weaker grass types do so, seeking protection in the bigger and stronger Lupinine. This was another design I struggled quite a bit with, but not as much as the previous one. This one also went through 3 different passes before I landed on the last one that I drew not long ago. Although I don't think there's too much of a difference between the second and the third one, even though I redrew both from scratch. Not only that, but I struggled a lot with making this look like a Fakemon, especially in the final pass. I tried a bunch of different alterations, but I still think there's something missing. I think it might be the fact that its head and face are directly facing the viewer. Finally, Lupinine evolves into Lupinhund, a combination of hund, the Swedish word for dog, and, yep, you guessed it, lupin. It is a grass and rock type. At this stage, Lupinhund has gained full control of its roots and will often leave a trail of lupin in its wake. It has grown out of its mischievous ways and mild annoyance for the grass types that follow it. Instead, it's grown protective of them. In the wild, Lupinhund will typically find a place to settle down, sending its roots into the ground and causing hundreds or thousands of lupins to sprout out around it over time. Not only does this make the environment and soil healthier, but it also strengthens any grass types that choose to live alongside it. If there are any predators that threaten the safety of Lupinhund's herd, it will protect them, even at the cost of its life. I decided on rock as the secondary typing for Lupinhund because I think that makes sense for a protective Fakemon, although I feel like I could have added more rock-type features. All it has is a couple mossy rocks on its back. I guess I could also say that at this stage, the roots around its body have become rock hard, but still. I guess I shouldn't be too hard on myself. There are plenty of dual-type Pokemon that show more attributes of one type than the other. The next starter I was excited to work on was the water starter, and for this I wanted to make this Fakemon a cat, which I think is perfect since we already have a fire cat and a grass cat starter. I started out by researching Scandinavian cats and came across the Norwegian forest cat, Norwegie, or Norsk skogkat, which, if you didn't know, is the official and beloved cat of Norway. It is also very strongly connected to Norse mythology. When I first learned about this, I got excited. I'm a big fan of mythology, and it felt like the perfect inspiration for my water-type cat Fakemon. The Norwegian forest cat is a friendly and affectionate animal with a double-layer waterproof coat. This coat requires daily grooming and makes them extremely resistant to cold. In mythology, they were believed to pull the chariot of the Norse goddess Freya. I also thought that it might be interesting to mix some more elements of Freya into the design of the evolutionary line. Freya has long, flowing hair and is very loving and compassionate. She is the goddess of love and fertility, but what was more fascinating to me was her practice of Seidr, a form of sorcery, divination, and prophecy, which is just begging for me to make the final form a partial psychic type. For a good part of the design process, I considered making it a water fairy type with a theme of love, since the Norsk skogkat is often seen as a fairy cat, and Freya is the goddess of love and fertility. It seemed like a fitting connection, but as I designed it, it started to look a lot more like a psychic type than a fairy type, and I ended up changing my mind. So, without further ado, this is Driplet, the water cat Fakemon, a water type. Its name is a combination of drip and droplet. Not my best Fakemon name, but I couldn't come up with anything better. Driplet is a quiet Fakemon that loves to nap near large bodies of water, almost as if it's drawn to them. Something about its presence causes the water to go completely still. If you come across one of these places, you're likely to find a Driplet if you look closely enough. I was really proud of the results of this drawing, as it looked more like a Pokemon than the first pass of Loopup. So, even though I drew this as well as the rest of its evolutionary line a few months ago, I didn't feel the need to redraw them for this video. You may have noticed, but the first sketch of Driplet looks completely different. The problem, up until this point, was that I was stuck drawing in the style that I was used to drawing in, which just made it look off. But once I really started trying, it all came together, and the secret to creating Fakemon started to click. This was also the point where I ditched the way I was trying to shade my Fakemon. I was trying to emulate how real Pokemon are shaded in their Pokédex entries, but it just wasn't working out. So I decided on a simple cel-shaded style. Driplet evolves into Flowine, the still waters Fakemon, and also a water type. Flowine is a combination of flow and feline. It is said that when it stares at a certain spot for a long period of time, it is communicating with a spirit, and I thought that this would be kind of amusing to add, since I've seen a lot of videos of cats just staring at a spot on the wall or the ceiling. I thought it'd be fitting, and also I decided to make this evolutionary line bipedal. I know that in the fandom there can be a lot of hate for the bipedal Pokemon and how humanoid they can look, but I actually don't mind them a lot of the time. A lot of my favorite Pokemon are bipedal. Gardevoir, Meowstic, Lucario, etc. I also thought that it would complete the trio of cat starters that start out quadruped and evolve into bipeds. However, I tried not to make them look too humanoid. Oh, and speaking of Meowstic, it might be obvious that it was a major inspiration for Flowine, although they still look fairly different in my opinion, and I really like this design. You know Team Rocket's Meowth and how he's always falling in love with different cat Pokemon? Well, I can't help but feel like Flowine would be one of those that Meowth would want to pursue. But perhaps I'm just biased. Just a thought. And finally, Flowine evolves into Misper, the Water Seer Fakemon, a water and psychic type. Its name is a combination of mist or mystic and purr, and it's honestly my favorite Fakemon name so far. Misper typically appears when significant weather changes are imminent. It's almost as if it's drawn to the places where its guidance is needed most. It is extremely rare to see it otherwise. Furthermore, it is often revered by sailors and coastal communities due to its abilities. It's believed that if you sleep near the body of water that it protects, you will have prophetic dreams of the future. Mistper has very powerful psychic powers. It's able to use its abilities to bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds, allowing it to gain insight on future changes in the environment. It can predict storms, tides, and the moving currents. I decided to make Mistper feminine because I've always liked the Pokemon that are feminine in looks, but also because this evolutionary line was partially inspired by the Norse goddess Freya. This was the most humanoid Fakemon that I had ever drawn, and I was a little worried that I wouldn't be able to pull it off. I struggled quite a bit with the legs. I wanted them to be cat-like, but it just looked weird no matter what I did. So I worked around it by giving Mistper something akin to a dress. And since Scandinavia is generally cold and the Norwegian forest cat is super fluffy, I decided to add some fluff around its design and use it to give Mistper a kind of mysterious look. I think I was able to achieve that. Last but not least, we have the Firestarter Fakemon. I wanted it to evolve into a dragon, even though that's not entirely an original idea for a Firestarter. But lizards and snakes are among some of the common pets that people have, and I thought it would be fascinating to have that evolve into a dragon. I mean, who doesn't want a cool pet dragon? But don't worry, it won't be too similar to Charmander in its evolutions. I already knew that I wanted it to start out as a snake, evolve into a lizard, and then into a dragon. It seemed like the most logical course of action, but I wasn't sure what the lore or rules surrounding it should be. I did some research on dragons in Norse mythology, but a lot of them didn't seem to fit what I wanted for my simple Firestarter. All the Norse dragons had such grand and interesting mythology that only seemed fitting for a legendary Fakemon, so I decided to dial it back on the mythological symbolism for this one. I went through a lot of different ideas and concepts for the role of this evolutionary line. These ideas include, but aren't limited to, clearing paths through frozen tundras, keeping eternal winters at bay, and guarding sacred lands. I didn't really end up with any of those, but I did eventually land on something to do with volcanoes, which I'll explain more later. I thought about basing each evolution on a specific Scandinavian reptile, but thought that would prove too complicated. It was going to eventually evolve into a dragon, but dragons aren't real. So I can only really base it off of how Norse dragons are depicted in general media and traditional mythos. It'd be difficult to find a specific snake and lizard to base the evolutions off of, so I just went with what I felt to be right. So without further ado, this is Lavworm, a combination of lava and worm, a fire type. When it hatches, it can be anywhere between 1 and 3 feet long. Lavworm is not fully capable of regulating its body heat, so it will burrow into volcanic soil or coil itself around warm rocks. It takes in and stores heat through the orange spikes that go along its body. It spends much of its time sleeping and absorbing heat, both to prepare for evolution and to power its fire-type moves. Furthermore, it is said that a lavworm cannot hatch if it is not first laid in lava. About half of the speed paint for this Fakemon was spent on the head. I was having some trouble simplifying the head and just drawing it in general, but I eventually got it right. I was originally basing it off of a snake species that I don't really remember the name of, but it doesn't really matter in the end as I scrapped it. Instead, I focused on making it look like it could evolve into a dragon. I wasn't exactly sure how to do that other than giving it spikes and horns. I also played around a lot with the colors. At first, I was going for an ashy gray color, but it didn't really look all that interesting or like a fire type. So I went for a more traditional red and orange color scheme. The lavworm evolves into Salavar, a combination of salamander and lava, also a fire type. It can be anywhere between 3 to 5 feet long. The spikes on its back are naturally hot to the touch and can cause severe burns. At this stage, it no longer needs to absorb heat in order to use its fire-type moves, and can regulate the temperature of its spikes. While it isn't able to cool its spikes below room temperature, it can heat them to the point where they can even start glowing. Protective metal-like scales have started to form on its back and head at this stage, creating a form of armor to protect against those that seek to harm it. I was worried about drawing this, as all of my limited experience with drawing animals has only included mammals. But I was able to pull through rather quickly. I was impressed with myself, and I feel like the shape of a lizard or a salamander is already fairly simple enough to fit as a Fakemon. Since I knew that I wanted its final form to be partially steel type, I thought it would be cool to draw some kind of metal plating along its back. I also decreased the amount of spikes and made them bigger. I really liked how it turned out. I especially like how the unevolved form looks all friendly and cute, but this stage looks more serious and cool. And finally, we have Smoldra, a combination of smolder and dragon, a fire and steel type. It is very difficult to find a wild Smoldra as it often likes to hang out at the top of active volcanoes. It keeps these volcanoes from erupting by absorbing their geothermal energy. Many will leave offerings at the foot of volcanoes in the hopes that Smoldra will continue to keep them from erupting. It is a rather large Fakemon and can be very useful in forging armor and weaponry using its scalding hot, fiery breath. Out of all three of these stages, I probably struggled with this one the most. I have drawn many a dragon in the past, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that I was trying to draw exactly like a Norse dragon, which ended in it not really looking like a Pokemon. And it didn't help that most real dragon Pokemon are bipeds, not quadrupeds, so I couldn't really reference real Pokemon for ideas. So I ended up redrawing it right before this video. It definitely looks more like a Pokemon now. I exaggerated the shapes of the head and eye, changed the feet and claws to be more similar to some actual Pokemon, and gave the wings more of a unique shape. I'm still not completely sold on its look, but it's growing more and more on me each day. And after all of that, I'm finally done. Here are all the starters and their evolutions again. This took me months to put together, and I am very proud of the result. For some of the first Fakemon I've ever created, I think I did fairly well. But what do you think? And which one is your favorite? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. For me, I'm not necessarily sure which one I prefer. I had a lot of fun with this, and these aren't the only Fakemon I've designed for this region. Some of them you might find familiar. If you're interested in seeing another video like this one, let me know. And if you have any ideas for some more Scandinavian-based Fakemon, let me know as well. But anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already to see more of my content. And if you're interested in more of my art, feel free to follow me on Instagram. The link's in the description. Take care and farewell.